medical education was in America, which was easy to do because it was in bad shape. So they hired a fellow by the name of Flexner, Abraham Flexner. And he was working at the time for the Carnegie Foundation. And he traveled around America and got the data together and published what was called the Flexner Report. You'll find this in any of the textbooks of the period about the development of medical education. The Flexner Report said, surprise, medical education was in a low state and needed to be reformed. Well, having then delivered the Flexner Report in the academic community and in the halls of Congress, now the great philanthropists came forward and offered money to reform medical education in America. Demonstrate the need, then offer the solution. So they did. They offered millions and millions of dollars to the medical schools in America. There were dozens of them that would accept their money with the strings attached, that they have some voice in how the universities or the medical schools would then contour the curricula for medical education. And of course, the universities or the medical schools that accepted the money are the ones that we have today as the great leaders in medical education. They had the money. They were able to build buildings and hire teachers with great credentials and bring in the equipment for the laboratories and all of that. The ones that rejected the money have disappeared. You don't hear about them anymore. They're gone. The pharmaceutical industries, indirectly through the tax-exempt foundations, which were mutually controlled by the same financiers, were able to capture control of the medical schools. In every case, the schools that took the money also took with the money people who were put on the boards of directors of the universities and the medical schools. These were Abraham Flexner and his brother, Dr. Simon Flexner, and a certain group. There were about 5 of them altogether, and 3 of them always showed up in the same positions with all of the medical schools. And they saw to it that with the money came the control. And with the control came a contouring of the curricula, so that now, from that point forward, all of the doctors getting their training would learn about drugs, drugs, and more drugs. And that is how it came to pass. One of the most perplexing questions that people have when they find out for the first time that there are therapies that are indeed very effective, and they find out that they're not available. They're illegal, as a matter of fact. The question is why? If these things really work, why doesn't my doctor know about them? Or if he does know about them, why cannot he get them? And why cannot I get them? And the answer to that question is very simple and very logical when you think about it. We have accepted the idea that it is the function of government to protect us. This is kind of a mindset that's been gradually growing among Western civilization for perhaps the last century, that people are not really responsible for themselves. It's the government's role to take care of them. And in that context, we have the thought that the government agencies, in the United States it's the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, it's their job to take care of us in this field of medicine. They're supposed to tell us whether this is good or acceptable, or whether it's quackery, or whether we're allowed to have it. We're like little children, and we look to the government to tell us. So we've allowed the governments to have the power, the legal authority, to control the field of medicine and to determine at that high level whether or not a therapy can be allowed. And the assumption is that these are all good people running these organizations, and they have no hidden agendas. They're not subject to financial flattery or anything like that. They're all good people and great scientists, and so we can trust them. And this process of getting all the way through these tests, in today's terms, never goes less than $20 million, and in many cases it'll cost you over $100 million, in some cases $200 million to go through that process. Now, who can afford $200 million? If you were to discover something that was growing in your backyard, and you said, this stuff really works, I don't know why it works, but look, it's curing cancers, and you tried to give it to your neighbor, you would go to jail because, you see, you're prescribing or giving, administering an unapproved substance. And you say, well, I'll get it approved. No, you're not going to get it approved unless you have $20 million that you are, ready to just spend on the project. That means that automatically the only companies, the only people, the only entities in the world that can ever get an approved substance are those that have the $20 million to spend, or $200 million, depending on where you are in the spectrum. That means the large pharmaceutical companies. So these laws have effectively blocked everybody out of the pattern except the very large, well-funded pharmaceutical companies. They now have a monopoly on all of these drugs for this very reason, supposedly because it's to protect us, you see. But really, it's to protect the large pharmaceutical companies. Beyond that, no large pharmaceutical company is going to take your weed that you found in your backyard and have it tested, because if they did so, they couldn't patent it. Anything that grows in nature, anything that's found naturally, cannot be patented. It has to be a man-made concoction before it can be patented. So why would even a large pharmaceutical company spend the $200 million or whatever it takes to prove that something growing in everyone's backyard is effective when they couldn't patent it and they would never get their money back? And that is the reason that anything found in nature, regardless of how effective it may be, will never be patented, and therefore it will never be approved. And therefore it will always be on that list, that horrible list they tell us, this is an unapproved cancer therapy.
Several individuals with severe and debilitating diseases have shared how the Beck protocol helped them heal.
I call people clients because I will not take over responsibility for them. A patient, I say, is someone who's given up responsibility for themselves to someone else. And I won't take that on, so I only have clients myself.
I don't want somebody to purchase from us out of desperation. I really want them to know in their heart that this is their next step.
It's been well worth the purchase, and it's something I intend to use forever.
You do have to be somewhat careful because they're experimental, and you cannot make claims to the patient. What you're doing is saying, look, this is an experimental procedure. It's non-toxic. It's non-harmful to the system. It may really help. And the research is really showing that it is helping.
One thing I've learned through all of this is that I don't take my health for granted anymore. I realize that each day is an exciting day because I'm healthy.
I often say things like, health is not a spectator sport. You've got to participate to do this. And you can't watch somebody else do it for you. But once you do it, you participate, it becomes part of your lifestyle. Then you just don't have any interest in these other things.
I was totally uneducated with the whole thing. I learned it all on my own, over 10 years worth of self-education. And I would say the first thing I would say to you or anybody else watching this video is to say to themselves, I can do it. There are other ways to treat my illness. I can combat this illness. And if it's to be, it is up to me. And have a lot of strength. Put a little prayer and effort into it, because you're going to need guidance along your way.
You have to just mentally change everything that you've been taught growing up, because you've been taught everything's fast. You got to do everything fast, and can't make time. Can't take time to fix a real meal.
If I can reach out to one person and let them know that there is something out there that works, then I'll do it, and that's why I'm doing this video.
The process of being sick, I look at it, I guess, from maybe a spiritual viewpoint. There's something for each of us to learn in life when we do receive an illness or choose an illness. And I think for myself, you go through denial, wanting to be who you were before. The real process of healing started when I started looking for practitioners with my heart rather than my head. And I think, again, that reflects on my life. I think that's what the gift chronic fatigue gave me, is it taught me to live my life from my heart rather than my head, which I had been up to that point.
My philosophy was that you're not going to be practicing science when you get out there and get a job.